Welcome to today's webinar. I am Amanda Banninga, Program Manager at ISPE, and I will be your host today. We have opened the session a few minutes early to let everyone get settled and to make sure you have a good connection. We will get started at 11 a.m. Eastern. While we are waiting, we will cover a few tips to help you get connected. If you are experiencing any issues with sound or connection, try using the phone dial-in. You can see if we have a local number in your area by checking the audio settings in your control panel on the top right. You can switch to a local number at any time. Just look for your local number, dial in your phone, and change from your computer audio to phone call. Make sure to turn off computer audio or you will hear an echo or feedback. If you are dialing in via phone, please make sure to use your audio pin, also in the control panel. Using the audio pin connects your phone line to your web presence. One additional tip you might want to consider is to use a wired internet connection instead of Wi-Fi. Or if all else fails, you can disconnect and reconnect, as that often helps. If you do experience any issues and miss any content, you will receive a link to listen again to the recording, as well as the PDF of the presentation within 24 hours of today's session. You will have access to this content on demand for 30 days. Before we get started, let's launch a poll to see where everyone is joining us from today. We will leave this open until we get started at 11 o'clock. Those responses are trickling in. Thank you for engaging. Looks like we're fairly evenly divided right now. I know the audience is still coming in, but at the moment it looks like we've got a third of you are in North America, a third in Europe, just over 10% in South America, and 20% in Africa and the Middle East. And I am going to go ahead and close this as it is now 11 o'clock. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Standardize Globally, Adapt Locally, Best Practices in Digital Validation. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Banninga. I am a program manager at ISPE. Before we jump into our topic, we have a few quick housekeeping items to cover. Today's webinar will be 60 minutes with approximately 45 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have any questions for the speakers today, please submit them at any time throughout the presentation via the questions option in your GoToWebinar control panel on the top right of the screen, and we will do our best to get to as many of the questions as we can at the end during the Q&A. The session is being recorded, and we will share the recording and the PDF of the presentation 24 hours after the conclusion of the webinar. You will have access to this content on demand for 30 days. We would like to thank Kneat Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar. Now, let's get started by introducing our first speaker, Art Gehring. Art is Vice President of Marketing Solutions at Kneat Solutions. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Amanda, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all. Thanks for taking time out of your busy days to join us on this webinar. Really excited about this topic and our speaker, Amy, who I'll introduce in a moment, but you're in for a special treat with her. So just moving right on to the next slide. I think we've covered the connection material. Let's go on to the next, please. Yeah, just a quick, we are a publicly traded company, so we have a disclaimer. So I want to tell you a little bit about Kneat and and our mission. This is from our CEO and co-founder, Eddie Ryan, who comes from the industry. He actually worked at several large pharma companies in validation and knows the pain that some of you may be experiencing, and really kind of is so passionate about, you know, delivering value and helping organizations be more efficient and faster with their validation. So, you know, our mission is to create business value. I think here's the agenda today. We're going to have a quick poll around where you are. We'll talk very quickly about Kneat, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion around harmonization in validation. And then we'll finish with a Q&A. So queue up your questions during the discussion, and we'll do our best to answer them all at that time. So Amanda's kind enough to trigger a poll for us. We wanted to get a sense of where you all are in your digital validation journey. Are you just starting off? Are you planning? Are you ready to launch? Are you already doing it? So very interested to hear where you all are to help us, as you know, how we can best help you in today's discussion.
And those responses are coming in, so we'll give the audience a little more time to respond.
So it looks like, you know, I think they're still coming in, but you know, there's sort of across the board. We have a lot of people just still starting out on their journey, or a good many of you are about to start or already delivering and hopefully seeing some of the benefits of digital validation. Okay, I think we're ready to move on from the poll. Amanda, thanks very much. Go to the next slide, please, Amy. And we'll just jump into a little bit about Kneat. We'll make this short and sweet. We are, as I mentioned, a publicly traded company on the Toronto Exchange. So, you know, we're held to those high governance standards that public companies need to adhere to. We are over 280 employees, and half of those, as you can see, are in development. So we invest quite a bit in innovating on our offering of digital validation. And we also have very many in professional services, and Amy is part of that team. We are the validation platform for 8 of the top 10 global life sciences companies. So, you know, we're a proven platform. We have over 120 customers with 65,000 users and over 450 global site deployments, and many certified partners that sell and support our solution. And we have a global footprint, as you can see, and all our development is in-house, and we are certified on ISO 9001, 2015, and 2701. So very high level, quick description as to who we are. Next slide, please. And so here we are. You guys are really in for a treat. Couldn't be anyone better to talk about this topic. Amy has extensive validation experience, both with Kneat in helping deploy many robust enterprise level validation, digital validation solutions, but also has worked at a leading biotech company as well, so knows things from that side. So really, Amy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your insight. Over to you.
Thanks, Art. Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. Like Art said, my name is Amy, and I'm going to be talking to you about harmonization. I am the Senior Solution Validation Engineer here at Kneat Solutions, and I've been with the company for 6 years now. So definitely got to see a lot of experiences over that time with both smaller companies that maybe have unique processes that don't necessarily need to standardize and globalize out to lots of sites, and then kind of the opposite side of that spectrum, where we've got some some giants that have tons of sites worldwide, and standardizing and harmonization is something that has to be thought of critically while you're implementing, to kind of make sure that everything's going to be aligned, be future-proofed, and really allow that level of control while still allowing some of that autonomy. So I'll go ahead and dive right in and get into some of the benefits. I know a lot of people, regulated customers especially, do need to maintain a sense of autonomy in a lot of their site-specific or regional locations, because some things just are not always the same. So I do want to preface that as we talk about harmonization, we're coming at it from the perspective that we know that you can't just, everyone does the same thing all the time at every location, and that there are going to be some differences. But we want to kind of highlight the things that you can harmonize on and the benefits of doing that from the start, and kind of getting that global process established for what can be governed globally versus what can be governed specifically per location or per site or per process, that kind of thing. So when you are looking at harmonizing, some of the benefits would be that when you're kind of establishing global content, then you're allowing that to be approved or governed by kind of a core central body. So for example, whenever you deploy an enterprise level system, there are going to be governance topics that have to do with that system that would be governed by a system owner, right? Like there's going to be one global system owner that would be responsible for that particular system from a perspective of things that should be applied to the entire enterprise level organization. You would still potentially have site specific admins for people at your facilities and your locations that are managing those users at that site, who maybe have their own specific training program to get access to that system. But there's still system-wide level governance that you have to go through some core functional group that's going to control that. So kind of thinking about that enterprise level system in your entire organization can help to cascade those responsibilities down from a global governing team or governing body. So we do recognize that you will need site-specific governance, but establishing that global content and that global team to own those things does help out when you get that going from the start, so you know who's going to own that going forward. So that way, when those things do come through, you can just have one governing body who knows the scope of everything that's potentially going to be changed, knows what the impact would be downstream and how that would cascade, so you don't have to get a representative from every site location, for example, to come together and agree on a change and all approve it together, because that's where you're going to run into bottlenecks and issues with things that really aren't that necessary to be governed by every single location, since they're still going to have a level of control that's up to them. So that global content and establishing that global team is kind of step one, and allows you to skip all of those approvals that you would need to consult with all these different site locations. So not bothering people is one of the benefits of harmonization. You're not bothering every site lead if you can go to a core governing team that's got global scope. When you have that data that's shared globally, it's going to reduce the risk of having missing or lost data that you can't find because it's following some process that only that particular site knows how that data is stored or where it's stored, and it's maybe specific to each location. When you have this information that's kind of governed globally, and you've got a harmonized process, at least for how global data is stored, then it becomes more central, and it's not going to be lost when you're kind of dealing with different systems. So deploying enterprise level systems would be a solution here. That would be a benefit that you would gain to harmonize by deploying those enterprise level systems, because everyone's using that system. You don't have site specific silos for different systems being used at different sites. And then most of those things are able to be controlled pretty effectively by those enterprise level role-based access permissions. So you can allow people to see the information from other sites in a restricted way or not. You can lock that down and have that only available to those who have those advanced permissions. You can kind of control it easily to make sure that the right people have the right access, but you know that it's at least accessible to the people that do have the right access. So making sure that you've got the same enterprise level system that's validated for your entire enterprise world. Like every site doesn't need to validate the same software solution to be using it. You validate it once and that applies to every site because it's a global enterprise level system. So making sure they're all using the same system, all in the same version, they're getting the same updates, that kind of path is how you get the benefit of having that data that's shared, and it's not lost due to different system silos. If you do have all of your content information in one source, and you're doing it in a way that's globally harmonized, it's a lot easier to have that data be more interpreted by AI systems and machine learning systems. They are, if you think about it from like the scientific perspective, like the scientific method perspective, the less variables you have, the more constant your end results are going to be. If you throw a bunch of variables into the mix, then you're going to end up with different responses every time. And you're not sure actually which of those responses caused it to be very different because you're trying to use the same inputs and outputs for different processes at different sites with different organizational strategies for how the data is stored. So those kinds of things can make it harder to implement some of these AI solutions that are, of course, very popular today and are looking to be rolled out pretty actively by lots of regulated customers in the life sciences, in computer systems validation. All of those customers are looking for how to adopt AI, and harmonizing to at least have common structures throughout your organization is a really great way to make yourself ready for those solutions, to enable yourselves to be ready for AI. Having those globally aligned processes can let you ensure that your workflows can be enforced by signatory requirements that are agreed at an IT level. A lot of folks today are trying to make sure that their systems are following CFR Part 11 compliance. They have the correct UDRLEX Volume 4 regulations included. They want to make sure that anything that has to do with electronic records and electronic signatures is not going to get them in trouble with any regulatory bodies. It's not going to result in any observations or write-ups or anything like that. So having those things, especially proceduralized, will benefit customers who do that by significantly reducing those chances of getting dinged by a regulatory body. If you've got those kinds of things that have to do with regulations, at least aligned where they can be regionally, so that they're not necessarily just controlled at a site-by-site specific location. Obviously, if you've got North American sites and you're following FDA regulations, that might be aligned a specific way, versus if you've got your European sites that are following more of the UDRLEX regulations. Those two regulatory bodies do pretty much align fairly well on a lot of their points, but at least having those aligned so that all of your sites, per region, are following those same guidelines, and having those signatory requirements documented and proceduralized and defined very well is going to benefit you if you're looking to harmonize and have that assist you with regulatory issues. So that, again, it minimifies the risk of non-compliance. It allows you to have more successful inspections, because if everyone's aligned, and one of your sites as well, it's probably going to be expected that your other sites are going to do well if they're following the same approach. There's going to be less opportunity for discovery if everyone is following the same risk critical path for the things that can be harmonized. So when we get into some of the risks and some of the challenges that we see pretty commonly with harmonization, we know for a fact that there's going to be things that are site specific that you're going to have to enforce, that you can't really harmonize on. So one of the common examples of that would be where we do have like large companies who are giants and they've got 50 site locations worldwide. They're not really manufacturing the exact same product at every one of their 50 sites. They've got lots of different technologies that they maybe are working with. They have different levels of R&D. Maybe they have the R&D at facilities and then the production manufacturing is at different facilities. Or maybe they have drug substances in one facility and drug products in another facility. And maybe they have a whole other facility that's just for medical device manufacturing and the automated assembly lines that go with those. So we do know that there's going to be different entire processes that are deployed at different sites across an entire, across the same organization that could be a challenge on how to harmonize those and proceduralize some of the things that you would want to enforce with those. So just want to highlight some of those challenges and kind of talk about how we can still work with those when we're talking about standardization. For the regulations by region, we talked about those a little bit, but even despite just the regulations being divided by region, if you look at ISPE and the FDA, if you look at consultation partners, anyone who's doing like validation consulting or regulatory quality consulting, there's lots of webinars and articles and ebooks and guidance all over the internet for how subject matter experts are all weighing in on their specific interpretation of these regulations. So it stands to reason that it's probably not that far-fetched that even within the same organization, one site may have interpreted a regulatory guidance statement in some of these guidance documents differently than another site did. And so they may have different interpretations of how that should be controlled, how that should be managed or proceduralized. And that's a very real risk whenever you're talking about these regulations that are, for example, recommending how you as a customer, a life sciences manufacturer, a computer systems implementing company should apply critical thinking and what you should consider when you're doing risk assessments, and what levels of AI systems are not suitable for manufacturing and life sciences based on how much autonomy those AI systems have in the process control that might affect your product quality or the patient safety. And all of those things are open for interpretation. So it's pretty real how there's going to be challenges for the different types of interpretations that might be had when you're looking at those different regulations, even from within a site. The complexity of forms. I know sometimes whenever I'm looking at digitizing processes, the actual paper documents, the Word documents or PDFs that we're getting that we're looking to convert and build into smart documents and embed these choice lists and properties and traceability that's directly tied to other documents in your system. The different forms that we get from one site to another are pretty different. Like a lot of experience that we've seen doesn't really have global level form templates that every site is supposed to use for a particular thing. It really depends on what your process is and like the level of risk that's involved and the level of GXP impact that's included. So we definitely don't expect that when we say harmonize, that means that everyone's using the same exact document template for every little thing. We might have anomalous results discrepancy form that is associated with a lab process, and that's going to contain different types of elements than a deviation form for change control process. Even though those are just kind of non-conformances, there's going to be lots of different types of non-conformances depending on your process, and depending on how critical and what metadata is being captured in those. So the complexity of forms is a very real challenge that we can actually get around a little bit with our recommendations here further on. A lot of the, as I was saying before, like when you're looking at doing your enterprise level rollouts, most systems, I would say, that are used, commonly in organizations today are available everywhere, but we do see some customers that do need different solutions based on region, or based on even site-specific SOPs that govern like the type of procurement that you are allowed to have or go through, or budgeting for particular systems. So some sites might have to have a different system based on how their procurement process works even. Like, it doesn't even have to do with regulations or GMP or anything like that. It's just kind of what's required from a site-specific location or regional location based on how enterprise level systems can be rolled out effectively. So that's a challenge that we've seen pop up before. Language barriers is another one, where we have seen customers who did want to harmonize and use some global style processes throughout their different locations, but they are having a hard time managing the content in all of the different languages that you would need to templatize that in. If you've got validation plans and protocols and semi-reports, you might be aligned on how you want every site to have those written out and how they're formatted, what kind of tables and data are included, what kind of justifications, the actual sections themselves, like the structures of the document. That could all be templatized, but it's hard to manage if you need 12 different language options for each one of those templates. Because making a change in one of the templates would, hypothetically cause all the other ones not to match if you haven't made those same changes in the other 11 templates. So having this kind of site-specific language need is one of the challenges we've seen, especially when there's not that global kind of governance body somewhere above that's managing the overarching kind of philosophical concept for what the overall validation strategy should be for the organization as a whole. So that's definitely hard to translate all of those changes across every single time. And then, of course, your organizational structure. Even if we say that we would like to align and have 3 signatures required on every document going forward. One is the author, one is a particular department head, and the other one is our quality department. That's something that you might standardize on, but different locations might have different titles for those. So if you're trying to govern what the title should be for all of these signatories that you might want to establish as part of your workflow, it might be hard to do that because you might call it QA manager in one location and quality officer at another location and quality engineering in your third location, and they're all technically different titles. So trying to figure out how to align when even your org structures site to site are different is another one of the challenges that we've seen. So if we look at some of the industry standards, we have what we call the state of validation report, and it's basically a survey that we send out each year, and we collect information from validation teams to determine what the overall themes are for regulated customers and companies today, and the challenges they're facing and the trends that were being seen, throughout the organizations, and it's coming at it from kind of, it's an unbiased perspective. We just want information. We just want to know where everybody's at in a lot of these concepts that are happening today that are popular today, like validation 4.0 and pharma 4.0 and digital pathway journeys and maturity. All of those things are just industry standards, but it's very different to actually get information about where at everyone is in those journeys, and how much they've implemented and what their goals are and what they're working on. So this is one of our state of validation reports. I believe it's available on our website if you'd like to see the detailed full version, but just wanted to kind of point out some of the relevant topics here. The top goals for validation teams recorded for 2025 included being more audit ready, having more process efficiencies, being able to more easily introduce new technologies, having everything right first time, less deviations, and then harmonizing came up as fifth on the list. So harmonizing those processes across sites is kind of down lower, but it's actually a facilitator for pretty much all of the above items. We talked a little bit about in the first couple of slides how if you've got everything harmonized, it's easier to introduce AI, for example. So that would be a facilitator for introducing the new technologies. If you have less variance on the critical things site to site, then you're going to have less deviations that are popping up, because it's more variable when you have those differences, and there's more potential for discrepancies to be found if things are not aligned. And it's pretty easy also on the reverse of that. If you do have a discrepancy or deviation, it's really easy to make that change everywhere else before it occurs or as it's noticed there. So it's kind of a way to always be kind of globally improving your processes if you've got that harmonized, because you have more chances of maybe one of your internal sites finding a discrepancy or finding an issue and then cascading it out to the rest of the organization to update it before something like that gets recorded as an observation. So having those things available, it definitely feels a lot more relevant when we see that come up on our polls as the state of the validation for how people are looking at their goals today. And then when we polled them on what the overall theme is for how people are looking at what they consider as the benefits of digital validation, that's an enabler again for being able to actually go and do that global standardization process. Because once you have your validation process digitalized, by definition, it's going to be digitalized on a software system of some kind. You're going to select a vendor, they're going to have a validation solution, and all of the top digital validation tool vendors out there today have enterprise level capabilities in their system. So it's something that you can deploy across all your sites and locations with one go at validating that system. So that takes a lot of the historical limitations out of the equation, because when everything is on paper or paper to glass, you're still counting on site-specific validation department heads to have a central repository, maybe on like a OneDrive or a shared cloud folder, maybe even it's just on their desktop, and then they cascade those documents to their validation team. And maybe each person on their validation team stores those protocols that they've been drafting as well on their drives. And maybe they don't want to start from scratch each time. So everybody is just picking their favorite previously done protocol or plan, and then they're just tweaking it for the next project. So that's a lot of levels of control that's just missing out when you aren't using a digital system to manage digital validation. Having those central repositories, instead of it being on someone's drive, someone's desktop, you can select from a list of templates in your system that are approved by the global governance body, that are approved for site-specific reasons. You've got the ability to even tweak those per site. If you know that you're the location and you always need these extra test cases in yours, you can templatize those and have those in a special little folder that everyone at your site has access to, and everyone knows where they are and can collect them. And then even if someone from another site wants to utilize those, if you set up the access so that you guys can leverage the work from site to site, those things could be leveraged by other sites as well, and it could just help everybody out. So having those central repository in general is what's going to kind of help facilitate that when you're talking about digital validation. Of course, the other two top benefits that were noted were data integrity, and just always being ready. You're always ready because the data is always there in the same location, perfectly accessible. You don't have to go find it in a binder on someone's desk or filed in an archive in the QA office or sent off to a document storage facility offsite. It's all enabled and ready to go. So getting to see that the global standardization there is third on the benefits as ranked by the customers and regulated, companies that were polled during this data validation is definitely a testament to how important that is perceived. So when we're looking at these systems, one of the biggest things that we can kind of take off the table is the worry that harmonizing or standardizing is going to be tricky because of the regulations that you have to meet, because of data integrity and ALCOA policies that you need to meet, CFR Part 11 compliance, electronic records, electronic signatures. Even folks in different regions under different regulatory bodies still have a pretty general alignment to those philosophies in general. So just wanted to point out that when you're looking at getting a digital system, a digital solution for your validation needs, all of the top notable solutions today are going to have those elements built in by design. Anyone who's got a software development life cycle who does behavior by design and they're doing their features based on real customer needs and customer expectations is going to have the regulations that we know you're expected to be following and that you're going to be held accountable for. We're going to have those built in to the system. So that's one less stressor that most organizations are going to have to worry about when you're looking at standardizing and harmonizing and alignment, because using these digital systems for digital validation prevents you from having to knowingly follow things like ALCOA plus principles, because those are built in. Those are integrated in the system in such a way that it would be near impossible for you to violate those concepts. There's going to be metadata that's attributed to each user based on their unique logins associated with their names, their email addresses. All of the metadata is tied to them. Every action that they do in the system is attributed to them. You can define what your signatures mean. If you're signing something, then that says that you've performed that step and that's the person who did that. Maybe you're signing it to say that you're approving this document as verifying that it is complete and able to be used in a quality decision. You're defining those signatures, and then you sign for those signatures, and it can't be forged, it can't be erased, you can't delete any of your approved documents or obscure your data in any kind of way. All of those things are just automatically controlled. So it's one less thing that you have to worry about when you're harmonizing, is trying to make sure that everyone's following some procedure for good documentation practices and things like that, where those are the actual regulations that you have to follow. That's pretty much eliminated from what you have to worry about when you're doing your standardization globally. Because picking an enterprise level system that handles this for you will eliminate that from being one of your challenges. Again, with the challenge that we mentioned earlier, where you might have different processes at different sites, like R&D at one site, production manufacturing at another site. Maybe one of your sites is just like quality and documentation, and there's not even like a manufacturing facility at that site. There are lots of different methods and processes that you would be able to implement, work processes in those digital validation solutions. So when we're looking at the different work processes that you can put into an electronic system as far as being able to operate a workflow, that could be things like a method validation process versus a process validation process. And maybe you need to do site-to-site transfer and comparability studies, and that's a whole different process with whole different documents than what you're doing with process validation when you're looking at critical quality attributes and critical process parameters and trying to make sure that those are controlled in a process control strategy. And so those are all much different types of deliverables per process. So being able to define those different processes globally is where you would do your harmonization. You've got global processes that are governed by the way that your organization wants to use that business process in general, and then that can just be cascaded and deployed out to the sites that it's relevant to. Whichever sites have labs and are doing PPQs, we'll get those processes. If you have other sites that are, maybe it's just like a fill and finish facility or packaging facility, maybe you need to do establish those packing policies and processes, and those are things that you would establish at a global level and deploy out to the sites that need those. So you still have the site autonomy for those different sites to be able to pick the processes that are applicable for them, be able to tweak even the deliverables if they need to site by site, by having the ability to establish both global templates that apply to those different processes, and add site-specific templates that you can add into those things pretty easily. So being able to have multiple work processes in the digital solution that you pick is a strategic factor that you'd want to look at when you're selecting your vendors. So how do you actually overcome those challenges that we talked about? Like what's the way that you can get all this harmonization and still be able to have some of this governance site by site? So things that you can definitely harmonize on are things like role-based access and permissions. Even if you don't call the roles the same exact thing, even if you have different titles for those different roles, you can still standardize the combination of permissions that you would assign to whatever the equivalent is for that role per site. For example, you're always going to have people who can go in and execute a protocol, and maybe those are different than the people who can go in and establish system entities and establish your asset roster and put in information about all of your different pieces of equipment, and your computerized, maintenance system and all that. Those are usually two very different people, protocol executor versus like a system owner. And then you're going to have people who are even controlling like the user provisioning for that particular system. So you're going to have an admin who is responsible for setting up the configuration that applies to everyone who's using that system, setting up user accounts for maybe the globally impacted things, like whenever you need to establish a new workspace or a new site location, you need an admin who's in control of the system, who can add sites and add site leads and things like that. And then you can control it even further down by having those system-specific admins that are maybe at your site location. There's surely, for those companies who've got 50 sites and you've got hundreds of people per site that need to get into that system because they're doing batch records or logbooks or validation protocols. There's not going to be one person, your CEO is not going to come in and do user procurement for hundreds and hundreds of people across all your facilities. So it's just kind of a top-down approach where you have one system admin that understands the impact for changing those critical elements in the system and how they will impact every site. And then you can establish admins per site that can just do things like user procurement, because they know that those people at that site have completed the training and that's recorded, and so they can do the work of adding those people in. So just establishing those general roles and those different combinations of permissions is something that you could harmonize across the entire enterprise level system. You still have flexibility to choose from those permissions and access groups when you're looking at your site-specific locations. You can use whatever combination you need for your folks. You can call it whatever permission you need to based on your site-specific SOPs. But the actual permissions that are selected and their capabilities for what those people can do, that's a harmonized process. Quality system process and global validation governments. So everything that you need to establish as just part of your quality system overall, that's usually a global scoped process for how your documentation is stored, how data is managed, what kind of documentation is considered GMP scope. That's usually a global process. What type of documents that come out of each site that fall into those categories, that can be managed at a site-specific level. But overall, your quality system and global validation is usually something that's controlled globally. And when I say global validation, I don't mean like freezers all for every site need to do this particular frequency of validation and they all have to have this specific type of protocol with this specific type of test case. I mean global validation as in whenever you're doing any kind of validation, you need to do an assessment on the system to determine its impact. You need to do a risk assessment to determine what things need to be tested, and you have to have that well documented and well justified. That's a global validation process that you would be able to implement then at every site and allow the different processes and sites to maybe have their own types of assessment forms and their own categories of impact based on what their process is and what's relevant at that site. But it's still kind of globally harmonized to the expectations that you need for your justifications and your deliverables overall. We have seen a lot of customers who prefer to have at least one global template format for at least like the minimal types of things that are required in types of documents. And a lot of those will actually just follow the established like ISPE guides. If you go look at computer validation, CSV, CSA, it'll tell you, oh, for a validation plan, you should have the following sections, and there should be a RACI chart in there that says what's going to happen and who's going to do it. So establishing like a global template format could be as simple as you need at least these sections because ISPE says you should, based on their interpretation of regulatory guidance, and we're going to align with all of these, popular, trusted industry standards, and at least make all of our people at our sites have these types of sections in their VPP or in their VSR. At least have some kind of commissioning protocol, and that's going to be a different scope than a qualification protocol. Those are the types of things that you would have as like minimal template formatting. It's not to say that you have this exact statement and this exact table and all of that in your document and it's got this exact title, but you've got the minimal content, the structure is formed, and then you allow your people to add to it as they see fit. So having those established is one of the more common harmonization strategies that we see people employ. And then master plans would be the last one. Most sites have their own site validation master plan, like an SMVP, site validation master plan, that says what they're going to do at that site. But there's still usually some kind of master plan that at least governs the way that site master validation plans should all be done or orchestrated at those sites, or is a global site master validation plan that says all sites shall devise a site validation master plan and it shall have these components and they shall do this type of qualification annually or whatever the case is. So there's still usually governance, even if you've got a site master validation plan, there's still governance about how those should be handled at the sites for every site. So those are kind of the different like elements that you would do for your harmonization items. The ability to control those per site and govern those per site. I mentioned the kind of caveats to each one of those in the above bullets, but you'd be able to establish your own workspaces per site, like, you know, a central location where everyone from that site location can go and interact with documents and folders and organization of data. You could separate those out by site. You could separate those out by process. You could control and restrict access to those based on that. You could include sections. You could templatize certain sections that you know are your favorite ones that your site likes to use, and you just always add those into those global templates each time. You can create your own site-specific templates, you know, whole document templates that use the global one as the skeleton, and then you can just launch those every time you need to. You can customize your packs as far as like how you want your imaginary digital binder to look. If you always need a plan and a protocol and a specification document and a report, you can always have those kick off every time you do a project. If you're doing something like a change project and you always need a release form and an impact assessment, have those kick off all at the same time. Those are things you can customize per site to get the deliverables that you want based on your location, based on your processes, but you're still pulling from global central locations that have those elements already pre-configured per process. But then you can choose the combinations that you like per site. So those are some of the kind of examples for how you'd actually differentiate those processes. So this just kind of illustrates what I've just said. It's just kind of in a top-down approach for exactly how to implement those. So you've got your global top-down process, like we said, the way that you templatize those and the benefits that you get with those, having the alignment with quality and being more efficient when you've got everything templatized, and then those different sites that can still establish their site-specific content based on templatizing those sections. Like I said, maybe you want to have some different approval workflows. Maybe you need 5 people approving at this site, you only need 4 people approving at another site based on the roles and the departments you have. So all of those things can still be globally aligned based on the permissions and the roles and what the meaning is of those signature requirements, but you can determine which one of those are applicable to your site based on your process. And then just my last note here for actually implementing that harmonization is if you are looking at harmonizing and digital validation facilitates that, then you're going to want to improve your process of computer system validation. If you're still doing traditional CSV and you haven't looked at how computer software assurance could maybe facilitate your ability to onboard enterprise level computer systems for the purposes of digital validation and such things, even with like, you know, adopting AI technologies, this is where you would want to definitely start, because if you've got a really good process for validating new systems from the start, then it's going to make your life a whole lot easier once you're ready to actually adopt those and you've selected your vendors and you've done your use cases and your business cases. Having an actual good CSA approach and a good vendor assessment process that lets you leverage vendor documentation, not have to duplicate a bunch of testing that's unnecessary, you know, define your intended use off the bat so you can do a quick acceptance test on it without having to replicate everything the vendor already did to validate it for you. That's going to make your life a lot easier. It makes implementation a lot faster, gets you the ability to use these solutions a lot faster and a lot easier. So that's where you definitely want to start when you're looking to adopt digital validation for the purpose of harmonization, to make sure you have a good process for CSV, CSA right off the bat. And then I'll stop here for questions in just a second. Just wanted to mention that we do have lots of customers who have come to us for harmonization in the past. Some of the ones that I've helped implement and that come to the top of my head right off the bat are 3 of the different customers that we have that are actually in the top 20 life sciences list for worldwide, have harmonized their processes with Kneat, have many facilities globally, 30 or more site locations that they've rolled this out to, implemented. And then all 3 of those have 7 or more of those unique processes. So they might have CQV and CSV and process val and batch records and e-logbooks and cold chain or automation, all of those different processes that you can implement and standardize, those are the ones that are being implemented here. And then each of those customers that did harmonize there, those three, each of those 30 or more sites all still got their own workspace, and they're still operating with levels of their own site autonomy themselves, and they're not necessarily locked into things that are going to make it harder to manage, because too much global harmonization will slow you down, and we don't want that either. So just wanted to point those out, that we do have, experience with those very large customers and successful harmonization for those types of processes. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Art and Amanda, I'm not sure if we have any logged already in the queue.
Yes, we do. And thank you, Amy. That was great. Before we dive into the questions, and it's not too late to submit any. We've got a few minutes here. I'm going to share with Amanda a link to our conference. Everyone's probably wondering, what are those crazy backdrops that I and Amy have on our screens? And that is actually a picture of Dublin, Ireland, which is the location of our next Validate conference, which is a conference dedicated to these kinds of discussions, where Amy and experts like her will be presenting on challenges and trends in digital validation. And we have many life science companies presenting also. So just to make you aware of that conference. So I see some questions coming in. Let's start from the top. Amy, we'll start with, here's one. To comply with 21 CFR Part 11, e-signature, e-report, audit trail with who, when, and what, and why, did any action is okay, or any other requirement is there? I think that's, I hope that makes sense. I don't know if that's perfect English, but that's the question.
Yeah. So the CFR Part 11 compliance with electronic signatures and records is kind of twofold. Like, one, it says that when you're signing something, electronic signatures part, when you're signing something, you have a defined signature for what that means, who signed it, and what authority they had to sign it. And then the electronic records one is someone has done something with that record. They've moved it, they've exported it, they've approved it, they've authored it, they've edited it in some way. That's the audit trail for who, what, when, why, like what was done for that record. So all those things that are commonly needed from our customer perspectives, like having a reason for marking something out and putting something else in, that's something that's automated with a lot of systems. It's automated with our system. If you try to change a value, it'll ask you for a reason. You have to type it in. It'll ask you for your signature. You have to use your credentials to log in and register that change. And then everything that you do in this system shows up in the audit trail, so that everything is traceable. All the signatures are captured. So there's not any way to not comply with CFR Part 11, because all of the requirements that we would have, when we build our system requirements are the CFR Part 11 regulations. Those are built into our system requirements.
Thank you, Amy. I also shared with Amanda, I don't know if she's shared it yet, a case study of one of the customers Amy was referring to earlier. So next question is, for standalone non-enterprise software, is it acceptable to perform the CSV for one system and leverage for another system, which is exactly matching?
So equivalency justifications are pretty common, pretty widely accepted in the industry that we've seen. A lot of the assessment forms that will be designed for the regulated customers when you're doing an assessment on a new system, it even asks you, is this equivalent to another system? And if the answer is yes, there's usually like a decision tree or a policy that has justification logic for why reduced testing might be required or no testing might be required. If it's equivalent to something else, maybe it's indirect impact, Maybe it doesn't have any effect on the final product because it's something like a part washer, and any of those things would get caught by, you know, QC analysis further down the line. All that stuff is just all part of the justification, where that definitely could be leveraged and it could be justified, but it would still be up to the regulated company to document the justification for why that's not required and for it to be acceptable. So yeah, equivalency is pretty common.
Thank you. We have a few more, and I'm not sure we're going to get to them all, but we will be sure to follow up with each of you on your questions if we don't get to them. Next question: what are the best practices for structuring a governance committee or a decision-making model?
So when we're looking at establishing like a global governance committee for customers, it's usually based on who would be the best stakeholder for that company, which is technically based on the process that you're using to deploy. For a lot of our regulated companies that are in life sciences, that usually represents like a manufacturing, like someone, you know, in the higher up of the organization who's in manufacturing, like a director of manufacturing or a head of manufacturing, that's going to be able to weigh in on the impact of how the digital validation is used when you're validating manufacturing equipment with that digital system. If you're using analytical processes, analytical instrument validation, methods validation, then your governance committee is going to include a representative from that one. It's going to be your global micro QC head or chem QC head or something like that. So having all of those different folks included is what we see most commonly in those global governance committees for who is going to govern certain elements of the overall enterprise level system. It's usually stakeholders that have an active role or, you know, impact for the members of their team that are going to be using that system.
Thanks, Amy. Amanda, can we take one more?
Sorry, I had to get off of mute. Yes, you can take one more.
Okay, thanks. So there's actually a number of questions about can Kneat share templates for some of these things? Example templates. Is that something we can follow up with people, or is that, I don't know.
We do. So we've got some guidance for templates that are relevant to how our system, like the Kneat system, would be validated by you as the customer, it like in general. So those things we would have, and we could share. Some of it's part of our handover pack, some of it's just content that we've got with sales that would be happy to share if you're, you know, looking to make sure that the burden of implementing a digital validation solution like Kneat isn't too you know, hefty. We have a recommended validation plan for how you'd validate Kneat, a recommended risk assessment for how you'd assess us as a, you know, a category 4 system from the Gantt perspective. So we've got some of those types of templates that we could share, but we wouldn't just have like example batch records to give you, or like example process validation, you know, control strategies. We wouldn't have those because we digitize your process your way. So everything that we digitize for you and for use in the system is your own process.
Got it. So we have those requests from those people, so we'll see what we can do or introduce you to the right person. So yeah. With that, Amy, thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Art and Amy. On behalf of ISPE, I would like to thank both of you for providing great information in today's webinar, as well as Kneat for sponsoring it. And I'd like to also thank the audience for joining us today. As we wrap up the webinar, I'd like to remind you that the recording and presentation PDF will be sent to you via email 24 hours after the webinar. With that link, you will have access to the on-demand recording for 30 days. Instructions for how to access a PDF of the presentation will be included in the email as well. If you enjoyed today's session, we will have a full webinar calendar on a variety of topics, including live complimentary and on-demand sessions available on our website at ispe.org/webinars. ISPE always strives to be here for all your professional needs. Make the most of your membership by catching up in the ISPE communities of practice, our past webinar libraries, blogs, pharmaceutical engineering magazine articles, and study a new or classic guidance document, all part of being an ISPE member. To find these resources or information on how to join ISPE if you are not a member, please visit us at www.ispe.org. And finally, we'd appreciate your feedback on today's session, as well as your ideas for upcoming topics and areas for improvement. A survey will be available at the conclusion of today's session and in the email you will receive tomorrow. Please take a couple of moments to complete the survey. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.